Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. Well, as the title of this video suggests, this is a bit of a rant. And yes, it is a secret that I've been holding on to for really a couple of years now, but I think it's time that it goes public. Well, basically, the long and short of it is I'm becoming quite disillusioned with Formula One. And there are many reasons for this, and I want to get into some of them. Probably there are more than I could afford to get into in a reasonably short amount of time, but I just want to start touching on some of them. It's come out in the last day or so that the FIA and Liberty Media are considering imposing a budget cap on Formula One teams. Getting this information from racefans.net. I'll put a link to this article in the description of this video, but the long and short of it is they want to impose a budget cap. They're calling it a soft budget cap, beginning perhaps as early as next season. No definitive word in terms of what that number is going to be, but speculation is saying it's going to be around $150 million US. Seems like an insane amount of money, sure, but it is a budget cap. Basically, what this comes down to, in my estimation, and of course I am reaching a bit here in terms of speculation and some educated guesses, but essentially what it boils down to, in my opinion, is the FIA wants to move Formula One in the direction of becoming a spec series. Now, a budget cap does not, on the face of it, mean standardized components. It does not, on the face of it, mean standardized cars. But if you are going to restrict the development budget of the teams, it effectively means that the amount of advantage that they're going to be able to achieve through their research and development is going to be limited. And at some point, it does mean that the field is going to equalize. Whether or not that comes down through means of spec components, that remains to be seen. But effectively, it means that whether you're Mercedes or your Force India or your Haas or your Sauber, you're going to be able to spend the same amount of money as everybody else to develop your car. That means that the performance gains that you're going to be able to achieve are going to be less as the years move on. It would not be an immediate effect, but over the course of a year or two, you would see the field start to equalize. It's just essentially unavoidable in the confines of a budget cap. But Formula One is not about budget caps. It's not about restrictions. It's about innovation. It's about innovation in technology, innovation in design, innovation in team management, things like that. None of that comes about from somebody telling you how much money you're allowed to spend. It just doesn't work that way. The real reason why I'm becoming quite disillusioned with Formula One is that Formula One is forgetting why it's called Formula One. We need to concentrate on the formula part of the name. The formula in Formula One is the rules, it's the regulations. It's the formula to which the cars are designed. It's always been that way in Formula One, and I see no reason why it should not continue in that way, but here we are with a budget cap. Leads me to think about the ways in which regulations are thought up and then later passed and published and enforced. Let's take a look at the history of Formula One regulations, starting with the modern era, and we'll go back a little ways, and I hope that I could illustrate my point in this manner. The engine specifications that we have in Formula One, they have been in place since 2014. It's the 1.6 liter single turbo hybrid V6 engine. Of course, you've got that hybrid powertrain currently with an MGU-K and MGU-H. It's running through an 8-speed gearbox, rear-wheel drive, of course. Fine. Those regulations, in terms of the power plants, they were put in initially by the FIA under the guise of cost saving. Now, I don't understand how developing an entirely new engine and powertrain specification was supposed to save cost. It ultimately has not saved costs. These V6 engines with the turbo power plants and the hybrid systems, they have turned into be the most expensive powertrain solution ever fielded in Formula One, meaning that the teams that have more money to spend on research and development have been more successful. Look at Mercedes. Undoubtedly, their package is the best in the field in terms of the engine, and, well, Mercedes have been winning everything since 2014. This really comes as no surprise. Telling teams that they can spend no more than, let's just pick a figure, $150 million for the sake of argument, telling teams that they can spend no more than that isn't going to solve that problem. He who has the best engine is still going to have the best engine, and he who has to play catch up, namely Renault and Honda, are still going to have to play catch up. So there's really no gain here. But there are losses. If you're going to institute a budget cap, that means that the teams can no longer trial new designs to the extent that they currently can, even though they are currently extremely restricted in terms of the things they can do in terms of testing, namely on-track testing. In-season testing effectively doesn't exist anymore in Formula One. It really hasn't existed since 2009. It leads us into the quandary in which we find ourselves now. We have one team which has run away with the World Championship for the last 4 years. Mercedes, they're going to win the Constructors' Championship again this year, as much as I really wish that weren't the case. I'd like to see other teams with the capacity to compete, but it really doesn't seem like it's going in that direction. And everybody else is perpetually stuck behind them. Partially, this is due to restrictions in development, restrictions in in-season testing, and it's also partially due just to the prowess that Mercedes have in developing this turbo hybrid power plant. Fine. A cost cap is not going to change that solution. Mercedes will still be ahead, and everybody else will still be behind, even more so now because their capacity to develop their engine is going to be reduced due to that budget restriction. Honestly, a cost cap is not going to solve the pecking order. It's not going to improve the competition. It's going to keep gaps at least as wide as they are right now. It may even cause them to widen. So a cost cap is not the way to go. The other side of this argument, it could turn Formula One into a spec series, because the little teams are going to say, look, you can tell us we can spend $150 million a year. That's all well and good. We still don't have the resources to do that now, so how are we going to be competitive? How will we ever become competitive? So I don't see it as too much of a stretch to say that the FIA could start to introduce more standard components. Yes, of course, all the cars have a standard ECU right now. That's been the case since 2008. Really, that came about as a byproduct of the FIA banning traction control, so they could police these systems a little bit more effectively. But I could definitely see small teams saying, look, we're not at the front now. You could tell us how much money we can spend. We're still not going to be at the front, so give us some incentive to try. Standardize components. Let's standardize the MGU system, perhaps. Or, I dare say, let's completely freeze the engine spec and standardize the engines. We'll just slap a different nameplate on all the engines, but they'll still effectively be exactly the same as everybody else. So that could equalize the field, sure, but that's not what Formula One is. It seems to me that over the course of the last 10 years or so, the FIA have been hell-bent on removing everything that makes Formula One unique. Formula One is unique in the sense that every team is a constructor, meaning that they design, manufacture, and race cars of their own design. That is something that is very unique in the world of racing. Really, the only other series that has a dynamic like that is WEC, particularly in LMP1, and we see LMP1 now appears to be going by the wayside. Perhaps it could reemerge as a sort of reborn GT1, something like that, where we could see unique cars again, but at this point it's a little unclear. So Formula One basically is the only major racing series in the world where the teams are constructors. They are designing and manufacturing their own cars. That's something that makes Formula One extremely unique, and it's something that has always been a part of how Formula One operates. To introduce budget caps, and perhaps to introduce more standardized components, it completely takes away the Constructors' Championship for the most part. It takes away what makes teams unique. That's something that would be a tremendous loss for the sport, a tremendous loss for the history of automotive design, and it would be something that would completely detract from the awe that Formula One had the ability to inspire. Just going back really not into all that distant history, going back into the early 2000s even. how Ferrari were able to turn their absolute dog of a car in 1995 into a championship winner by 2000. That's amazing. And that's the sort of story that can happen when you allow teams to innovate. Going back a little bit further into the 60s, when teams first started to understand the idea that aerodynamics were not just important for making a car fast in a straight line, but you could use aerodynamics to make the car faster in a corner. You could generate downforce, make the car's corner harder. And that, when you started to see wings sprout up onto the cars and the team started to understand how we could manipulate airflow, not only just to cut through it, but actually to use it to a performance advantage, that was huge. And that spurred on all of the technical development that we've seen in Formula One ever since. 1970s, the late 1970s, with the team starting to introduce things like ground effect. They're exploring these concepts. These are innovative ideas that were allowed to thrive in the regulatory environment of the time, where you basically had this is the maximum displacement of engine you can run, and here are your general dimensions for the car. Everything else, well, designers, have fun, go play, see what you can come up with. And that's what spurred on the innovation in Formula One. Through 1995 to 2008, the regulations that we had then, they were stable. Look at any car from 1995 and compare it to any car from 2005 through 2008. Sure, there are differences in those cars, big differences. Those are regarding engines, some chassis dimensions, aerodynamic ideas, sure, but macrocosmically the cars do look quite similar, and you can take a look at any car of any team in 1995, compare it to one in 2008, and you can definitely see the family resemblance. You can see how those cars are related to each other because they were designed around a set of stable and more or less consistent technical regulations. Formula One has gone away from this, and it makes it very difficult to compare performances of years gone by to what we see now. 2009, the cars from 2009 look essentially nothing like the cars from 2008, just 1 year before. This was when the FIA was saying, well, we need to make the cars a little bit more simple from an aerodynamic standpoint. We need to improve overtaking, so we'll chop up the front and rear wings. We'll take away all of the design innovation that the teams came up with for the midsection of the car, just ban everything, and it'll improve overtaking. Well, it didn't improve overtaking, and in anything, it just added more cost because teams just needed to design their cars completely all over again from the ground up. They kept the engines, but that was it. Everything else was new. And it didn't have the performance advantages that they were looking for from the side of the FIA. It did not improve overtaking. It did not improve the pecking order. If anything, it just showed you how, when you do completely change things, one team is going to get it very right, Braun, and everybody else is going to be playing catch-up. Moving into 2014, or even before this, into 2010, 2009, new regs. Do we let them remain stable for a couple of years? No, we completely change them again for 2010. We say, well, you can keep the same wings, but now we're going to ban refueling. So once again, you need to redesign your cars. Make them longer so you can get a bigger fuel tank in there, carry a whole race distance's worth of fuel. All right, complete new redesign again. 2011, oh yeah, new tires. Yeah, so again, back to square one for everybody. Now 2014, yeah, new engines, V6, turbo hybrid, so all these V8 engines that you've been running and developing for the last few years, well, throw them away and start from scratch again. Do a completely new thing that's never been tried before, it's never been tested before, and yeah, good luck. One team got it right again, Mercedes, and that's why they've run away with all the world championships. What are we seeing now? 2017, another completely new overhaul of regulations. New aerodynamic philosophy, more downforce, wider wings, make the cars faster around the corners. It did make the cars faster around the corners, and, well, the performance figures in terms of lap times, they're comparable now on many circuits to the V10 era, 2003, 2004. A lot of the lap records still held on the same circuits that we go to from then and now. They still apply from 2004, but some of them have been eclipsed now. That's encouraging. But one of the things that's missing is the spectacle. These V6 engines just don't sound good. They're not loud enough. They don't have the high revving melodic sounds that we loved from the V10 era. They just don't exist. It really takes away from the spectacle of watching a race. Yes, the cars are fast. On many circuits, they're faster than they've ever been before, but they just don't look the part. And that's a problem. That's something that the fans really need to see. They need to hear speed rather than just see it, because watching a quiet car going around a corner really fast, yes, is impressive, but it's not nearly as awesome to watch as it is watching a race from '04 or '05 with the engines screaming their hearts out to 20,000 RPM. It's it's just not the same. From 2017 to 2018, well, let's raise the minimum weight again. Let's introduce Halo unilaterally. Nobody asked for it. Very few teams had even tested it before they homologated it and made it a mandatory component. And now we've got Halo. Teams didn't want it. Most of the drivers didn't want it. The fans certainly didn't want it, but now we've got it. It's made the cars heavier. It has completely spoiled the onboard cameras. It has spoiled the aesthetics of the cars from the outside. It's made it harder to see the drivers. It's honestly, it's not been a good thing. Yes, there was a safety argument to be made for it, but let's be honest here. Most accidents that we have seen over the course of all of racing history in open wheel racing cars, injuries or deaths would not have been prevented by Halo. So once again, it's just something that's imposed by the FIA, which brings me to really the crux of the matter of to why I'm becoming disillusioned with Formula One. To put it bluntly, Formula One doesn't give a damn about its fans. It really doesn't. Nobody wanted the V10 engines to go away, but they went away. We got used to the V8, some of us even came quite to like them. Nobody wanted the V8s to go away. The V8s went away. Nobody wanted the cars to be chopped up like they were in 2009, but there it is. Nobody wanted these V6 turbo hybrid power units, as we're calling them now. They don't even have the decency to call them engines anymore. But we got them anyway. Nobody wanted Halo. We've got Halo. So here we are. Formula One, as it's been marketing itself now, it appears to care more about the Grand Prix venue than it cares about the Grand Prix. It wants to go to exotic locales. It goes to Azerbaijan now. If you're not some sort of political science major, how many of you have even heard of Azerbaijan before Formula One went there for the first time in 2016? I did, but I really didn't care. Now I have to care about Azerbaijan simply because they want to go to an exotic sounding venue. Is the racing in Azerbaijan good? Not really. It's basically a bunch of straight lines linked by 90-degree corners. We have had a couple of interesting races in Azerbaijan, but mostly because of cars crashing into each other, not because the racetrack is particularly conducive to good racing. And speaking of the racetracks themselves, think of the venues we have lost at the expense of bringing in new venues, new exotic locales like Singapore, for example. Another racetrack that's just straights linked by 90-degree hairpins. We've lost Imola. We have lost Manicourt. The Italian Grand Prix at Monza is once again up in the air. Honestly, what is Formula One? If you're going to call yourselves the pinnacle of racing, what is Formula One if you're not going to go to some of the most well-known, most respected, and most loved venues in the world? I don't know. What is there about a race in Azerbaijan that has more allure than a place like Brands Hatch, for example? Or has more allure than a place like Manicourt or Imola? I don't know. Can you go back through the archive on F1 TV and watch an Azerbaijan Grand Prix from 1990? Oh, wait, no, you can't. These circuits have no basis in the history of the sport. They don't contribute anything into the lore of the sport. You can't go up and watch a highlight reel of a Senna qualifying lap in Singapore, for example. You just can't. But you can at Imola. Can you compare that lap to a 2018 lap? No, no, you can't, because Imola, they can't put up the money to host Formula One. How come Formula One isn't paying the circuits to visit them? That's a completely other argument. Really, it's all culminated to where I am today in saying that the sport isn't a sport anymore. Formula One has marketed itself as a destination rather than a show. It has become a designer brand. It is not a motor racing competition. Formula One, they're trying to promote themselves as an exclusive, expensive mark that only the rich and powerful can play with. Just take a look at the ticket prices for most races. They're insane. Over here in the United States, if you want to see open wheel racing, it's IndyCar. Ticket prices, if you want a general grandstand seat, $80. That's pretty good. If you want to have access to the paddock and pit lane on race day, like 120 to 150 bucks, that's quite reasonable. The access that grants you, you can literally get into the garage as they are doing a gearbox change an hour before the start of the race. That's pretty cool. Could you ever get that close to a Formula One car ever? Never mind on a race weekend? Nope, not going to happen. Could you walk through the pit lane an hour before the race and physically, touch the tires that are about to go on to one of the race cars? Nope, can't do that. So, honestly, it brings me back to my point at the beginning that Formula One doesn't give a damn about the fans. They don't care about the TV show. They don't care about the show at the racetrack. They don't want the fans anywhere near the cars. They don't want the fans anywhere near the pit lane. And they just price most people out of it. I can't afford to go to a Formula One race. If there even were one near me, I couldn't afford the ticket prices. I could afford, though, to take a 2-hour drive up to Long Pond, Pennsylvania and go to Pocono and see IndyCar, though. Open wheel racing, V6 engines. They're a lot louder. They sound a lot nicer. They don't have hybrid systems. They don't have halo. They don't have all of these restrictions. I can go see it, and I can enjoy it, and I can have a good time, and I can see what I want to see, and I can go and meet drivers if I want to. I can talk to team personnel if I want to. I can go stand at the end of the pit lane while they're wheeling in all the tires and wheel guns and stuff. That's great. You never have that sort of access in Formula One. So really, it just comes down to, yeah, it's no longer the show that I want to see. What I really want to see, and what I know that a lot of you want to see, is cars that are fast, but also cars that look good and sound good. These turbo hybrid power units, they're never going to sound good. I think the definition of a good sounding race car as far as Formula One is concerned is the V10. They sounded otherworldly. There was nothing else on the planet that sounded like a Formula One V10 engine. And now there is nothing on the planet that sounds like a Formula One V10 engine because they don't run anymore. And it really is a crying shame when you go through the archive and you watch a race from 2004, 2005, and you enjoy it more than the racing that's going on right now. Because the racing is closer, the cars look nicer, and they sound better. It's a real crying shame. And it doesn't look like it's about to get any better. 2019, once again, we're changing the regulations. No stability in the regulations. We're changing the front and rear wings. We're changing the midsection of the cars. Who knows what that's going to do? Is it going to solve overtaking? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say no. In fact, it might even make it worse. The cars are going to be slower, and when you look at the macrocosmic plan of everything, it looks very similar to 2009. That didn't solve any problems at all. It just made the car slower and more awkward to drive. I think we're going to see more of the same. We're not going to see any changes to the engines. Mercedes are still going to be out in front. So basically this year's championship and next year's championship, they're already decided before they've even started. That's really what's got me disillusioned with it. Comparing this to the other side of the pond here in the United States, what's IndyCar doing? Well, they've got ground effect cars. They're generating a lot of downforce without all that much drag. The cars can follow closely through the corners, particularly on ovals, because they're basically not running wing on ovals. They're generating most of their downforce with the under tray. They can follow nose to tail through a 200-mile-an-hour corner. It works very well. On the road courses, they go to these road courses, very old-style road courses here in North America. They have gravel traps. They have concrete walls on the outside. There's penalties for making mistakes on a road course in an Indy car. You see the drivers when they're overtaking on road courses. It's spectacular because you know it's a well-thought-out move, but at the same time you know it's gutsy because if they put a wheel off the track, they're going into the grass or they're going into the gravel or they're going to hit a concrete wall. But guess what? They're fine. If they crash, they're fine. They don't have halo. Do we see drivers being injured every day in IndyCar? No, we don't. Unfortunately, quite recently, we've had the incident involving Robert Wickens at Pocono. That sort of accident was just unbelievable. That's not par for the course. Racing's a dangerous sport. That's going to happen. Unfortunately, it happened to Robert Wickens. But I'd venture to say, had he been in a current Formula One car and had that incident, he wouldn't have his legs right now. because the way that Formula One deals with their safety is they go out and they tell all of their circuits, oh, yeah, by the way, you have to completely change your configuration for us to go here. So add miles of runoff, add Tech Pro barriers, pave all of the runoff areas, don't put gravel anywhere. And what that does to the racing is, well, you see drivers do stupid things. You see Valtteri Bottas in Hungary, for example, just chopping across Sebastian Vettel and Daniel Ricciardo because he knows that there's really no consequence to it. If they make contact, he's just going to spin off into 10 miles of tarmac, and then he's going to get the car running again and resume the race. IndyCar does that. You're going to be in a gravel trap at best and a concrete wall at worst, so you better be careful. And we see better racing. We see drivers making smarter decisions in IndyCar than we do in Formula One. IndyCar, yeah, it's slower because it's cheaper, because you do have homologated spec chassis. But that's what that series does, and it works. The cars are just as safe. Again, I'll use the Robert Wickens example. He'd be an amputee right now had he been in a Formula One car. That IR18 aero kit and the DW12 chassis held up being thrown into the catch fence at 200 miles an hour. Did its job. A Formula One car, well, they just rely on miles of runoff. It really is a mess. It really is a mess. It's gotten me very frustrated. I'm really just very upset with what we're seeing in Formula One. And again, this cost cap that they're talking about, this budget cap, maybe even for 2019, it's a disaster. It's not at all what Formula One is. We want constructors in Formula One. We want innovation. We want technology. We want teams to be able to try things that are a little bit crazy, but they just might work, like we saw in the 70s. But nope, not going to happen. The FIA seems hell-bent on removing everything that's unique about the sport. They basically want to turn it into a spec series. We already have spec series in open-wheel racing. Formula One was unique in the sense that it wasn't a spec series, but it looks like it's going to become one. It's really just taking away all of the allure of what made Formula One great. And I don't understand it, other than the idea that Liberty Media and the FIA want to turn Formula One into a destination rather than a spectacle. They're turning it into a designer brand. And really, when I watch a race, I don't want to see rich and powerful people doing rich and powerful things. I want to see competition. And Formula One, they're just removing all aspects of competition. They're removing all aspects of innovation on the part of the car design. And it's just one knee-jerk change after another. Like these 2019 regs, they're coming out simply because of the Australian Grand Prix this year. One race where some moron said that there wasn't enough overtaking. Oh yeah, we're going to completely change the design of the wings for next year. Watch the British Grand Prix and tell me there wasn't enough overtaking. Watch the German Grand Prix and tell me you were bored. But nope. The FIA says, screw you if you're a fan. We're going to do what we want, and you're going to watch it anyway because we think you're a captive audience. And meanwhile, we're going to make you pay now to watch it in many places in Europe with pay TV only contracts. It's a mess. It really is a mess. They continue to disregard everything that the fans ask for. They continue to disregard most things that the drivers and teams ask for. Quite honestly, it's a farce. It's not something I want to see too much more of. And honestly, look at Fernando Alonso. I know that many of you have wanted me to say something about Fernando Alonso leaving Formula One. Fernando Alonso is leaving Formula One for many of these reasons. There's no competition anymore. He knows that McLaren's never going to be competitive again. Why should he stay? And with a budget cap, McLaren needs a whole lot more than $150 million a year to catch Mercedes. They're never going to be able to do it, and he knows it, and that's why he's leaving, and that's why he's probably going to IndyCar, where it is competitive, and it is a whole lot more free in terms of what teams can do within the confines of the standard chassis, and it's a whole lot more open for the fans. When you go to a race, you walk in, you can go anywhere you want, you can talk to anybody you run into, it's awesome. Formula One just doesn't do that. They're never going to do that. They've become more reclusive, more exclusive, more turned off from the general public. Really, it's disgusting. But that's where I stand on Formula One. So, yeah, a little bit disjointed here, I know, but just trying to get some of those things off my chest, and the long and short of it is, yeah, I've become quite disillusioned from Formula One. It is not at all the sport that it was. Certainly throughout most of its history, it's no longer a sport where one team like Tyrrell or Lotus could get a crazy idea and bring it to the track and have it win races. It's the innovation's gone. It's just completely gone. It's mostly due to inconsistent aerodynamic rules and just macrocosmic regulations in general. It's regulatory instability. It's changing the cars every year or every couple of years, so you can never get any sort of consistent running order develop out of that. It's not something that I want to see too much more of. It's become a designer brand. It's not a sport anymore. It's yeah. That's where I stand on Formula One. If any of you bothered to listen to all 30 minutes of this, please let me know what you think. Anything else that you'd want me to expound upon a little bit more? Again, this is just an overall kind of brainstorm idea, but these are the things that are bothering me about Formula One presently, so please feel free to let me know what you think as well. Until next time, thank you all very much for watching. Ferrari Man 601 saying thanks, and we will see you soon.